I'm Aruna Papp. Welcome back to Family Mediation and Healing. From time to time, you have heard me talk about my work with the immigrant families and domestic violence. There were many times over the last 3 decades when I reached out to government agencies for help because the challenges that we were facing were too great. And many times I was disappointed because I was told there weren't enough resources to go around. Then one day at 11:30, I got a call from the Minister for the Status of Women, Aruna Papp. And all she said was, I would like to help. Of course, I was unable to sleep. I was so excited that somebody in the federal government had made a phone call and said, I would like to help. It was a challenging time, an exciting time, a thrilling time because we had been heard. And that challenge was next taken up by the Minister for Citizenship and Immigration, Chris Alexander. Today in TAG TV studio, I have this minister with me, and the first time I'm having a chat with him about the issue of forced marriages and other issues that are faced by immigrant women in particular, but the larger community as well. So Mr. Alexander, welcome to TAG TV, and thank you for giving us your time.
Thank you so much for having me.
Tell me, you as a father, when you heard about the problem of immigrant women facing forced marriages, how did you feel about that?
Devastated. I come from a family where women dominate, as in so many families, and where the greatest pride that the family takes is in mobilizing, coming together, celebrating, bearing witness when a woman and a man, or 2 women, 2 men, it doesn't matter, when a member of your family chooses to be with someone else for life, chooses to make that commitment to another person, to support them, to love them, to be with them, in many cases to start a family, that is one of the greatest forms that joy can come in for individuals and for families. The idea, as it first came to me when I was quite a young child, growing up in this city, as I saw on a much larger scale as a diplomat in different parts of the world, including Afghanistan, and as it was brought home to me by reports, accounts that I had as minister, the idea that anyone should force, compel, with the threat of violence and or other consequences, including death, someone to enter into a lifetime commitment, and usually a lifetime of misery and suffering, that goes against everything that we hold dear as Canadians and as human beings. And so, I was not someone who had met a victim of forced marriage until perhaps my teens. Since becoming a professional diplomat 25 years ago, I've met dozens, maybe hundreds. And as Canada's Minister of Citizenship and Immigration, I felt I had a responsibility, a duty, because of courageous Canadians like yourself who told the story.
And yet, majority of Canadians who are not from immigrant communities are not aware that this is happening to Canadian citizens. Young girls and some boys who are born and brought up in Canada are taken out of Canada, forced into marriages, and literally live their lives in a life of sexual slavery.
Absolutely. And depression and mental distress and
And we are not allowed to talk about it because we are afraid that we are stigmatizing certain communities, or we are stereotyping certain communities. And I feel very strongly that that kind of political correctness has been used as a baseball bat to shut and hurt people who want to bring this up and say, we have the right. These young people, as Canadian citizens, have the right to live a life of safety and life without violence. And so, when you became the Minister of Citizenship and Immigration, you took on the challenge. Tell me about the bill.
Well, first, it's a bill that came to us from Canadians. Again, Canadians like yourself, there are dozens, as you know, who've had the courage to tell their stories firsthand. Books, lectures, blogs, whatever. They are reminding us that just because we can't see something, just because we haven't heard.
Well, but we were doing this for 30 years.
Yeah.
How come it is your ministry, your government that said, we want to do something?
Because we were a government and we are Canadians who know that this country is special because at its best we take action. When we see injustice, we try to right that injustice. When we see issues being neglected, people tiptoeing around, suffering violence, whatever, either at home or in the world, we speak up. And I'm not alone in that. You know, that's the way Canadians are for the most part. We had a mandate because we had done a lot over a decade to reform immigration, to go even further than previous governments had done, and to try and get at some of these issues that had been neglected. I think it's fascinating what you say about people denying that this is a problem. That's maybe the biggest challenge we faced from those evangelists of political correctness and others. They said, show us the statistics. Where is this? You're fear-mongering with a non-issue. And of course, that's the most dangerous line to take of all. And my mind went back to those who said maybe we should work with the Taliban in the 1990s. Afghanistan's been in civil war. Let's see how it goes. They're bringing order to this country. And we know it was,
What
as
happened?
it turned out,
Yeah,
most repressive regime, no education for women and girls. Similarly, human smuggling.
Yeah.
Our government was the first ever to, human smuggling had been a crime in Canada, but police were not empowered, courts were not interested or able.
We hadn't even recognized publicly that this was a problem.
We didn't have the tools.
Yeah.
And people said the same thing. There is no human smuggling. Why do we need to do more? We, with the help of some very compelling groups in civil society, some very conscientious Canadians, realized it was a problem, created the services to look after victims in communities, empowered the police to have integrated teams to look at these very sophisticated networks backed by organized crime that were bringing people in, keeping them as slaves in basements, not in a huge number of cases, but in hundreds of cases now that have been investigated. Yeah. And lo and behold, since that legislation came in, since those integrated police teams were put together, we have had dozens of prosecutions.
It empowers people.
And the number
like
is
police
increasing.
And social workers and Justice Department, yes.
And this, as you know, is one of the hardest crimes to detect, to report. It's an intimate crime. It's often a domestic crime. It's a crime where those responsible, the perpetrators, have every interest to back each other up, to get their stories straight, to elude accountability.
Even the victims, for example, of forced marriages didn't realize that it was a crime. It wasn't a crime because the perpetrators were parents who were selling their children into marriage and under the guise of tradition, under the guise of practice. So it was difficult to save somebody who is a 16, 17-year-old who's being forced into a marriage with a 40-year, 50-year-old man. So there wasn't a law to protect those victims, but now there is.
Now there is, and now there is more awareness thanks to you and all of us who've taken an interest. Now we need action. And let's be very clear about who we're talking about here. Forced marriage, as with early marriage, underage marriage, as with domestic violence, as with polygamy, and all of the honor-based violence, so-called honor-based violence, all the crimes that we were seeking to take action against in our bill, they can be committed and are committed by any group. We have had polygamy as a crime in Canada for over 100 years. Mm-hmm. There is still a very well-known community or two in British Columbia mm-hmm. where polygamy is practiced. Mm-hmm. And the police told us they were powerless to prevent this. They were powerless to prevent girls from being trafficked into the country to become 5th, 6th, 12th, 13th wives. We are not talking about newcomers in particular. We are not talking about any particular part of the world. We are talking about Canada, and we are talking about the standards we expect all of us from each other.
I am interested in newcomers because I work with the immigrant communities, and for me it was very important to have this act so that I could educate the community and say this is now a crime, and educate even the victims because it empowered the victims. But I don't want to say that it was a threat, but it is. No parent wants to go to jail for arranging a marriage, but they didn't know that this was a crime. Yeah. So it is a powerful tool.
Exactly. And in Canada and outside Canada, it had been normatized, it had been accepted through some kind of cultural explanation. This is what we do. It's not your decision. It's our decision who you will spend your life with. And we all understand arranged marriage happens. Introductions are made. It's actually a blessing. If parents like the opposite number as much as the individual being wed after giving their free and enlightened consent. But when there's an imbalance, when someone is being forced, when there is compulsion, it is a crime and we need to treat it as such. And this is not just a marginal issue. You know very well that Girls Not Brides, a very credible network of partners around the world, working with the United Nations, funded by Canada, to try and reduce levels of early and forced marriage in the world. They think there are 700 million
That's
girls
a huge number.
And women in the world today.
And that's just an estimate.
It's just an estimate. And 150 million boys and young men. And if we don't take action, it's going to be over 1 billion before we know it.
I want to go back to a point that you just brought up that needs a little bit of clarification about arranged marriages. And we've had enough controversy about what arranged marriage and forced marriage is. I'm not against arranged marriages as long as those people in the marriage and the couple are adults and have given their consent. And they understand and accept that yes, people, my family, my relatives, friends are bringing us together, and I have the power of saying no, I don't want to get married. So that's arranged marriage. No problem with that.
That's right.
They're adults. They are adults and they can consent. The problem that we are talking about is where there isn't a choice. I was 17 when my sister came and said, "You're getting married next month." I didn't know that I had a choice. But that was India. And everybody else in the neighborhood was the same. But in Canada, the girls, the boys, and there are many boys as well who are forced into marriages, they need to know that they have a choice. They can go to school, they can have careers, they can have a life of their own choice and making, and parents cannot force them into marriage.
That's right. And
that's the law.
That's right. And there is no gray area here.
There is no gray area.
Talking about the free and enlightened consent, the free choice of the individual to decide with whom they're going to spend their life. When that free choice is not there,
spend their life or leave the marriage.
Or leave the marriage, exactly. They decide the fate, or not get married at all.
Or not get married at all.
Which is an absolutely legitimate option for lots of people. When that does not happen, we're talking about forced marriage, and forced marriage is serious. there is an international convention, I think it's called an additional convention on the elimination of slavery, which enumerates several crimes, serious violations of human rights that the authors of that convention, and Canada is a party to this convention, consider tantamount to slavery, similar to slavery. Forced marriage is central to that list. This is not something to just joke about. Oh, that's just an arranged marriage where someone was reluctant. No, this is where people are forced against their will into a life of depression, mental illness, isolation, violence, misery. And it happens all too often, more to girls than to boys.
And forced to stay
and
in
forced
that
to stay.
Yeah.
With
An
the
abusive
consequence
that
if you leave, if you try to disappear, if you try to report.
the punishment will be very severe.
Exactly. And so over 50 years after that convention was signed, over 70 years since the end of the Second World War and the adoption of a universal Declaration of Human Rights, which must include the form of dignity that this represents, we still have this challenge of approaching 1 billion people who are victims. And so one of the Sustainable Development Goals, agreed by the whole world under the auspices of the United Nations, is to eliminate all forms of violence against women, domestic violence, sexual violence, and early child and forced marriage. And that is a very big challenge. And my in being part of that negotiation as part of a government that was in office when it happened, in being a proud Canadian who's seen how, in what high regard we are held around the world, I think we should set it as a goal to be the first country that can truly say we are free of domestic violence, and we are free of forced marriage, and we are free of early and child marriage, because that's the kind of example we want to set. If we go around the world preaching about these things, yet at the same time neglect them at home, we are not living up to the standards and the image that we have of our own country.
And now that we have the law, we need to do something about it. We need to find the resources to educate the community, challenge and face the challenge that frontline service providers are facing. We need to explain to them, teach them what is the difference between arranged marriage, forced marriage, and what the implications of the law are. That kind of train has stopped midway. What do I do?
Well, unfortunately, in the last election campaign, as you know, the focus was not on forced marriage, not on the substantive issue that we all agree needs to be addressed. It came on to much more superficial issues. Someone called the idea that we should phone the police to report this crime when we see it, when we become aware of it. Someone called that a snitch line. Well, the last time I checked, Canadians by and large who are proud of the low rate of criminality in this country and the rule of law that we have in this country, they don't call 911 a snitch line. You do not, if you see your neighbor's house being robbed, you don't sit around because you're worried about snitching. You call because the rule of law relies on citizens to be the base of responsibility on which police and the whole justice system is built. So let's get back to those issues. We need to continue this conversation and make it substantive, not partisan, to make it about victims, not politics. We need to
train the professionals who come and answer the call, for
absolutely.
example, the children's aid, the police, the social workers, and the
training
justice
on a massive scale.
Yeah. What is it? What is forced marriage? What is arranged marriage?
Frontline settlement workers.
Absolutely.
It should be part of the briefings that newcomers get before they even come to this country about what is expected, not just on the one issue of forced marriage, but on domestic violence and status of women generally. We need some additional services in this.
And safe places. Safe places when you remove a child who is under the threat of forced marriage. We can't just dump them with foster parents. We can't put them in group homes. We haven't got any places, and I am, not ashamed to say that I have called police on many occasions over the 30 years, and our police are excellent in helping us find solutions. But again, their hands were tied until the law came through.
Correct.
And now they're, getting some information, mostly from the media, of what is law, what is forced marriage and arranged marriage, and the difference in how the citizens are protected. Again, the other thing we need to do is take this information into high schools, elementary school. We need to tell the children and the school teachers what is a forced marriage. That definition has to be out on the streets, and that's not being done right now either.
No, I agree. Just as domestic violence and so-called honor-based violence is not brought into the open as often as it should be, there is no reason why we can't continue to make progress on these issues. But it will take awareness, public debate, public conversation, training on a massive scale, from frontline settlement workers through all kinds of social services to police and prosecutors. And then it will take law enforcement. I mean, there is no scenario in which this phenomenon gets tackled and behavior within the small segment of the population that is actually making this terrible mistake changes without some investigations and prosecutions. And that's why we thought, and I continue to think, that integrated police teams that specialize in this are the way to go. The United Kingdom, which I think we would all agree has the issue on an even larger scale.
Absolutely. Yes.
And has done more to gather statistics. They have an integrated law enforcement unit that is struggling to keep up, but it at least has
They've started.
They've started. Serious investigations, some prosecutions, and that gives hope to those who are otherwise without hope, as you know.
The other point I wanted to bring up is facetiously, and that is, when a victim stands up and says, I'm being forced into a marriage, the punishment is very severe. You as a government, you as a minister stood up and took a stand. Your punishment was very severe as well.
Indeed, and I am proud to have taken that position. We'll never stand down from it. The experience of last fall and losing the election has only redoubled my belief that this is the right thing to do. We need to do a better job of communicating in future, of countering the misinformation that can be part of this debate. I think we can and will do it. And sometimes, Aruna, as you know, you have to take a step or two back before you move forward with even greater vigor. And so I can see a day when we will be making even more ambitious proposals to continue ensuring that Canada is the great place to live we know it to be, that we do and deliver on integration, settlement, all aspects of immigration and migration, including generosity to refugees, better than any other country. This is why we all love this place.
So are you saying this issue is still close to your heart and you're still going to continue championing this issue? And
Absolutely.
How will you do that?
Well, this is, being on your show is part of it. But this is one of the reasons why I and many others like me have chosen to take a hand in public life. This is why you are an advocate and a speaker. When you see victims, when you read their stories, when you see how massive this issue is globally, and what a chance we have, not just here, but to set an example that has an impact far beyond our borders, it's very motivating. There are lots of things we can all do to build TV stations, start companies, helped Canada move forward on lots of fronts. This one is more fulfilling than almost anything else I can imagine because it's about basic human dignity. And it's not about a few people, it's about a massive population, and it's about improving the lot of the whole world. When I read through the Sustainable Development Goals, I'm proud that that is there. I know that goal is there partly because Canada insisted and pushed among many other partners who might have been more skeptical. But it's one of the most important goals, and it's something we can actually do. Look at the Millennium Development Goals. No one thought we could reduce levels of illiteracy, reduce levels of lack of access to school, reduce levels of poverty to the extent we have in only 20 years roughly. Let's do it again. It takes everyone leaning in. It takes everyone coming together. It does take some courage, but when we show that courage and when the clarity comes, thanks to the voices of victims like yourself, we are in a completely different place. The potential of human beings to renew themselves is infinite. And I think Canadians have a special role to play in driving that self-improvement for all of the world's people forward today. This is one issue where we can make a real difference.
Canada, over the last many decades, has been identified as the safest place for women to be. What an honor, what an honor. That includes every woman that's on this soil. I want to thank you for taking the leadership role, you, Rona Ambrose, Jason Kenney, and others who championed this cause. And we look forward to the work that you started and will continue. And thank you for taking the time to come and talk about it. And I really would appreciate you telling all Canadians that it is their responsibility to speak up. So as a last appeal, please speak to the camera and ask people on my behalf and the other victims to, when they see it, to call.
Thank you, Aruna. Listen, dear friends across this country, Canadians who care about your children's future, your grandchildren's future, think of the women in your life. Think of the young people in your life. Would you ever accept that one of those bright, ambitious, sincere, talented young Canadians that we see on every corner of our communities today would be forced against their will to spend their entire life in a home in slave-like conditions, hating every moment of it, fearing the consequences of that compulsion, fearing violence, suffering mental anguish, mental illness? No, you would not accept that. None of us would accept that, and yet many of us, too many of us, have met victims, have seen cases from a distance, have heard of cases that were addressed too late. It is not too late to take action to make Canada better on this front, just as we have over generations made this a great place for women and girls to live, the best place in the world for women and girls to live, by many, many steps forward, small and large. When you see a friend, neighbor, a relative speaking in terms that sound like forced marriage, when you see a case like this, speak up. Speak up within your families, discuss it. Speak up when and if a crime is committed to the authorities. They are there to help us. And together, we can be part of making history. We are setting out to be the generation that eliminates forced marriage, continues a steady trajectory of decline for forced marriage in this world globally. Let's be the first country to say, on the basis of statistics, investigations, hard work that lies ahead of us, that Canada is no longer a place where anyone can get away with early marriage, the marriage of children, or forced marriage. it's within our power, all of us working together to make that so. Thanks in advance for all of your support and interest.
Forced marriages is not a problem just in immigrant communities. It's a Canadian problem, our problem. And it will take all of us to make Canada a safe place for every woman, regardless of her cultural and ethnic background. Until next time, I'm Aruna Papp.
#1 multicultural channel. This is TAG TV.